Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to let your sports opinions fly for the main event. A 7-team elimination match to decide the District 4 3A Championship. Presented to you live by PilotPointBearcats.com. This 10-week match has been sanctioned by the University of Interscholastic League. Our celebrity referee for the District 4 3A show is none other than the daytime psychology professor, Texas high school football storyteller, North Texas insider, and DFW Inside High School Sports, the most feared member of the Texas high school mafia, the one, the only, small-town Dixie, the professor,
Showtime! From the home offices in Parker, Texas, in the shadow of South Fork Ranch, it is the Professor, Matt Diggs. Thank you for tuning in to another District 4 3A report. We are powered by PilotPointBearcats.com. And again, we'd like to encourage you. We're still at the one because we're in non-district. Last week we're in non-district, so who knows what I'll be challenging you to do next week. Either like, comment, or subscribe to the podcast. It helps generate a social media buzz and all kinds of terms that I still don't understand. And we're going to start out talking about. I'm a little dangerously today talking about criticizing the ISD of the website that is associated with the website, even though they're not directly associated with each other. They're their own independent entities. I'm not really sure how all that works, but we're going to start out by criticizing Pilot Point for some of what happened this past week, kind of our lead story, if you will. And I get that's kind of a dangerous thing, but I like to live dangerously, and I think everybody with the District 4 3A report knows that I will always say what's on my mind, and I will always say what's in my heart. And what's in my heart is a little bit of frustration and anger toward Pilot Point this past week, because they are the only one of the seven teams that did not play a game this past week. In fact, they canceled their game against Farmersville, and they canceled it very quickly and very early in the evening. And, you have Ponder and Crumb in the same general area where that game was being played. Ended up, multiple hour delay, and they came back Sunday, or Saturday, I should say, early afternoon, and they finished that game, and that was one of the bigger surprises of the weekend, and we will definitely talk about that. But just how quickly they canceled that game, I feel like it fosters, there's always a saying, and I love this saying. I tell it to my kids, and I speak it proudly. In truth, is that you are what you marinate your brain in. So if you're somebody who watches, just divisive stuff every single day, I think that's what your mind is marinated in. You're going to be very divisive in your commentary because that's what you're surrounding yourself in. But if you're surrounding yourself in positivity and resilience and positivity, regardless of many of your thoughts, I think that's what your mind is going to be part of. And I look at the Farmersville High School Facebook page, and in a surprising decision, this was posted on I think Friday night at 9:27 p.m. In a surprising decision, the football game has been canceled and will not be made up. True fans of Farmersville are encouraged to take out their frustration by voting for Farmer Joe in the high school mascot logo contest. And the link to Dave Campbell's where Farmer Joe is competing in the logo contest. And I think you can draw a lot out of that very angry post. That Farmersville really, really wanted to play this game and were willing to bend over backward to come back on Saturday, because this game was at Pilot Point. Whatever they had to do, compensate the referees, What morning, evening, they just really wanted to play this game and get their kids that 10 games. And Pilot Point really did not want to play that game. And what message does that send to your program when you aren't willing to bend over backwards, when you're not marinating your brain in resilience? And Farmersville was definitely willing to do that. And Pilot Point was very quickly not willing to do that. And Pilot Point may not win a football game this year, ladies and gentlemen. If you look at the computer polls just right now, they are the lowest rated team in District 4 3A, and it's currently a touchdown below the next tier. They continue to fall further and further away from the pack. So even in a loss, and I think they would have lost to Farmersville, that get that game practice. There's a lot of players who are new on Pilot Point, and the repetition, the competition, it is so important. And for Pilot Point to not do everything they could and so early to just abscond from that responsibility of getting those kids that game, to me is just unheard of and very disappointing. And I think another thing that is telling is if you go to Max Preps, Farmersville has recorded that as a forfeit and a win on their end, and they've given a loss to Pilot Point, and Pilot Point hasn't disputed that or done anything to that end. They're just on Max Preps are 0-3, and Farmersville is 3-0. And so to me, it's very disappointing. And I'm sure if I was sitting here with the superintendent, they'd have any number of justifications on why that was the case and why that was the smart thing to do. But every other school figured a way to wait it out and to play the game, whether it was Friday or Saturday, in Brock's case on Thursday, just how it was scheduled. So I'm very disappointed in Pilot Point, and I think that might be indicative of where their season is going, where their compass is pointed, what their mind is marinating in. Their mind is not marinating in a world of resilience and that finding a way to get things done. That spirit that a lot of high school coaches really teach, and one of my favorite things about high school football coaches is that teaching of resilience and positive psychology. A lot of football coaches don't realize how psychological they are in what they say and the true grit and the true impact of what they do. But it is incredible, and I'm always in awe of high school football coaches for that reason. So very disappointed in Pilot Point. This week they're going to play Bells, and we'll talk about that as we get there. But I fully expect Bells to beat them by 50 or 60, and Pilot Point may not win another game this year. So there's my little rant about Pilot Point and how that went off. So I can't talk about them and how they did, but I can talk about the other 6 teams. And Brock played Wimberley this past week. And Brock, you're starting to see, I challenged Brock. Who is going to be that person who can, create that offensive spark for Brock? Who can be that player who can step up and be the consistent player? And this week they had one of their best offensive performances, and Brody Woods kind of gave us that with 18 of 28 for 253 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. But again, you hear that interception, you hear that they had a fumble, so multiple turnovers again, and really Brock losing by 1 score with 2 turnovers. If that is inversed, maybe they're able to win that game. And they still have to figure out whatever it is that is plaguing them to consistently be on the wrong side of this turnover battle. I think of Frisco Reedy, and Frisco Reedy is a team last year that won 2 or 3 games in almost improbable fashion, where they had a punt block in the end zone to win a game, and they had a game where they had like 80 total yards but had 3 kickoff returns and pick sixes to win the game in the playoffs. Just all kinds of improbable things. And this year, they're a little bit down, and they started having an improbable win against Frisco Lone Star this past week. But Frisco Lone Star had a 42-yard walk-off bomb blown coverage to end the game, and that Reedy magic that we talk about kind of subsided. And it's just a lot of averages. You kind of regress toward the mean, and you think that eventually these things are going to work themselves out. But for Brock, I'm sitting here through 20 games now, the 16 last year and 4 this year, and looking at, maybe 15, 16, 17 of those games where they have convincingly lost the turnover battle with 2 or more turnovers. I mean, there was a point last year, I remember tracking it, that it was like 5 of the first 6 games they had at least 2 or more turnovers. So it is just so curious at that level, why is this happening? And yes, Wimberley and Wichita Falls Hershey and Texarkana Pleasant Grove are fantastic 4A Division II teams that are going to generate some mistakes on your part. But you would think accidentally they would have a 0 turnover game. I mean, my Panthers of Plano East have had a couple of 0 turnover games in that time span, and they've only won 5 games, and Brock has won 12 to 13 of those last 20 games, losing 4 last year, if I guess 5 at the end of the day when they lost that state championship, and having lost 3 of these or 2 of these 3 games so far, so 7 losses in the last 2 years. But you would have to think that would rectify itself at some point. A name to watch that I was impressed by. Maybe it's their go-to player. Colt Matlock had 4 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown. Carson Finney had a very nice night, 7 receptions, 69 yards, and a touchdown. Tyler Butler, 2 receptions, 12 yards and a touchdown. And again, running the ball, though, it was very bad. So it's like Brock finally adjusted and said, okay, we can't run the ball. They only had 22 runs and 28 passes, but we can have success passing the ball, and you saw that offensive output with them able to score 27 against a very good Wimberley. And through that possession control, they kept Wimberley to their lowest point total of the year. But running the ball, they only averaged 2.5 yards per run. And I just think, when that's not going to work. So this offensive line that I thought was the strength of the team, again, it's 4A Division II, but you have to be able to assert your personality. And one thing I think about Gunter in that game against Walnut Grove and then this game is that they were able to assert their personality. Even though the very first quarter it looked like Walnut Grove was pushing them around, they stuck with their game plan, and eventually they wore Walnut Grove down and wore them out and ended up beating them by 40. And then the next week, Walnut Grove came back and almost beat Salina. So Walnut Grove is definitely not a slouch. So I'm still seeing progression in Brock, but still there's just that turnover issue that they got to get it fixed. And I don't know when it's going to get fixed. We're in 19 games in the last 2 years. It still hasn't been fixed yet. So maybe this week against Gunter, we'll find out. Moving on to Paradise versus Godley. One of the, again, a fascinatingly good game with Paradise beating Godley 36-8, and just another dominant performance. Godley has an incredibly high-powered offense, and Paradise completely shut them down. Yet again, they were only able to rush for 100 yards over 44 rushes, 96 passing yards, forced 2 turnovers. Paradise defensively, we talk about their offense. We talk about Austin Iglesias and Landon Holly and Will Johnson and some of their studs, and those are the right players to be talking about. Those are 3 players that make that team go. But defensively is really where Paradise is, making hay. It's where they're building their resume, and I think that Paradise continues to show that they can win in a multiplicity of ways because their rushing game got shut down against Godley. They only had 27 rushes for 88 yards, but Austin Iglesias was able to pick them up and go through the air. They're very multiple in their approach. They'll take what you give. We can rush the ball. I mean, we may see some game where we see 27 rushes for 250 yards, and we'll see other games where they have to go hog wild through the air. And this was a game that they had the advantage through the air. Austin Iglesias 11 of 18 for 211 yards. And Landon Holly, just an amazing day, 7 catches for 174 yards. We know that this district has some really good receivers, and we consistently talk about some of the good ones. Last year, we talked about it with Pilot Point, Ponder, and we got Case Peacock back, and Landon Holly is certainly upgrading himself to the level of the level of first team all receiver and maybe an offensive MVP if he continues to do that. Obviously, Austin Iglesias is going to get the headlines. When he went down last year against Whitesboro, the team had basically no chance. But Landon Holly, you have to have somebody who you can throw it to, and Landon Holly has done a great job with that. But again, in looking at Paradise, they're making mistakes. Now, they're playing good enough to overcome it. They had 2 lost fumbles. They had 13 penalties for 120 yards. And they're not playing competition like Brock is, so it's a little bit unfair to compare apples and apples. But Paradise is going to have to get that cleaned up if they're going to be able to compete against the Brocks and the Jim Neds of the world. Specifically because of their schedule, they really only have to play Brock potentially twice, and then how they're going to compete against Whitesboro. That'll be a important battle. But Whitesboro is kind of giving us that head scratcher yet again that their defense just isn't there. I predicted against Pottsboro that Major McBride would have potentially 300 yards. He did not. So if you took the under, you win that bet. But he did have 37 carries for 231 yards and 6 touchdowns. And as a team, they ran the ball 56 times for 385 yards. Caden Humphrey, the quarterback, ran the ball 16 times for 137 yards. So they did get the 300 yards. It was just split up among 2 players. And you look at what Whitesboro did offensively, and you can't fault anything offensively again. Clay Hermes, 12 of 23, 248 yards, 2 touchdowns. Running the ball, Max Parker had his best day of the year, running the ball 19 times for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns himself. You saw Carter Sluter in the rushing game as a change of pace, 3 carries for 49 yards, big plays with Carter Sluter. He also had 2 big receptions for 79 yards and a touchdown. Brett Donaldson, 5 receptions for 94 yards and a touchdown, but they cannot stop the run. And when I'm thinking about this district, Brock, Paradise, even Ponder and Peaster and Boyd to a certain extent, if you can't stop the run, what are you going to do? And yes, I don't think those bottom 3 teams that I talked about are going to have nearly the running attack that Bells and that Pottsboro have, but their passing games are much better. And how we saw Crum kind of have a field day passing the ball against Whitesboro as well. So I don't see it, being better the other way. If you could stop the run, will the pass be better? Crum kind of showed that. Now we have a little bit of calibration with Crum and Ponder, where we have to start worrying about is Whitesboro even now maybe going down to that 4th position. If Ponder is able to play Crum and stop them defensively the way they did. And now last week was a crazy week, but we know that Ponder, this is only their 2nd game, and Ponder defeated Crum 22-9. This was a game that was 22-3 at halftime, and then Ponder just kind of messed around in the second half, held on to win. We talked about him last week. We introduced him. Tyson Price is the name to watch. 10 of 18, 149 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also rushing the ball 16 times for 67 yards and a touchdown. Ponder offensively is not a flashy team. They do have Case Peacock. Case Peacock had 4 of those 10 catches for 111 yards and had both of those touchdowns. But they are grinding it down. They are compressing the game, and they showed a little bit of defense now. Ponder in defense was not something we talked about last year at all, but 2 games now, they have significantly changed their dynamic. Ponder only giving up 39 points, and they're giving in their 2 games, they're giving up almost 50 points a game last year, especially to this point in the season. So Ponder a turnaround, a team that's better, and right there going to be fighting for that fourth playoff spot right now with Peaster and Boyd. I don't think Pilot Point, as I talked about, is going to be competing for that fourth playoff spot at all. Boyd had a interesting game against Lake County. Or Lake County, Lake Country, Fort Worth Lake Country, Country Day, private schools. I don't. Fort Worth Country Day. I just call them Lake Country, Fort Worth Country Day. Who knows all of it? But they were able to. Country Day wins 28-21. Braden McIntyre had a couple of big plays, but again, the running game is still a little bit off for Boyd, so that's something we're going to be keeping an eye on. Is if Boyd can figure out that running game, or are they good enough to where Braden McIntyre can throw them into the next tier? But Boyd, you see them progressing a little bit, but that first game against Blue Ridge is even more of a head scratcher now that you see Blue Ridge has kind of fallen off as one of the top teams. They've had two straight losses now, and they've had two kind of non-competitive losses the past 2 weeks, and they are in a dogfight in that district in 8-3A with Gunter, Bells, Lone Oak, Leonard, and Howe. The computer poll has them currently just at the fourth playoff position, with Leonard having passed them. And this is a team that beat Boyd pretty handily in week one. So obviously we know the biggest improvement comes from week one to week two. But again, that's just a big head scratcher about how Boyd is going to calibrate with the rest of the district. Jacksboro against Peaster. Jacksboro with a very convincing victory in that game, 42-19. And again, Jacksboro was pretty much able to do whatever they wanted passing the ball. Landon Belcher, 17 of 24 for 286 yards. Ty Steedley had an efficient game passing. He is yet to have that next level big game, 130, 150 yards. That seems to be what he throws for. Are they going to be able to break the big play at any point? And against Jacksboro, I thought that might be an opportunity. They're very consistent. They can work their way down the field. If they can stay out of their own way and avoid the penalties, they can drive a field, but they just lack that big play presence. And they've got two very special players in Rhett Steen and Rhett Kelly, who are excellent players. Rhett Kelly had a 62-yard touchdown, and Rhett Steen 6 receptions for 35. Like Diggs, if he has a 62-yard touchdown, how can you say that they don't have the can't break the big play? You got to be able to do that somewhat consistently. That was, again, like we talked about last week, almost half of their total yards. After that, it goes down significantly. Running the ball, they only had 20 carries for 75 yards, averaging 3.8 yards, and one of those runs was 25. So when you take those two big plays out of the equation, they had 217 total yards. You take their two biggest plays out, they only had 100 yards for the rest of the game against a Jacksboro defense that has been pretty generous in giving up yards. So Peaster, offensively, I think they got to figure that out and get a little bit more consistent in their gameplay. So that kind of brings us to this week, looking at what we are going to have. We have Pilot Point against Bells. We saw what Bells did to Whitesboro. I don't think Pilot Point is going to be competitive in this game. I think it's just going to be how big of a first half lead Bells gets out to before they kind of call off the dogs. I think Bells is going to at least score 50 on them. I can't see Pilot Point scoring anything in the first half, so I think Bells is going to win a 50-7 kind of game. Then you have Boyd against Wichita Falls City View. City View had a nice bounce back win against Trimble Tech, but Trimble Tech hadn't played any games, so I think Wichita Falls City View might have had an inappropriate bounce from that, where you might think they're a little bit better than they are. I think Boyd is going to beat Wichita Falls City View this week. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I think Braden McIntyre will have a nice game, and he will take them to the next level, and Boyd should be able to win that game by at least 10, I would say. Peaster against Wall. This is a really bad matchup for Peaster. Wall is going to be a heavy favorite. Wall is 2-1, and Wall is right there as one of the better teams in 3A Division Two right now. They are at the top of that District 2 3A with Early and Brady and Ballinger and Great Creek and San Angelo Leadership Academy. And I think Wall has a really good chance, other than Canadian, to be potentially playing Canadian for the right to go on and play Gunter. So Peaster at that level, with that lack of offensive explosions that we've talked about, I think, again, it's just not a good matchup for them at all. Give me Wall by 42. Whitesboro against Sulphur, Oklahoma. They did not play this game last year, and I think, if I remember right, and I'm gonna feel bad. I should know this, but I think the Sulphur coach had a heart attack or something, and they had to cancel the game, or something to that end. So we didn't get a chance to calibrate them from last year. I remember being kind of sad. My memory is not the best. So Whitesboro fans are probably punching their fist in digs. How can you not remember that? And I have a lot of things I have to remember. So, yeah, you got to give me at least a little bit of a break there. But I watched a little bit of tape on Sulphur to try to get a picture of what this team is going to be. They're 0-2. They've lost their first two games. Lost to Washington 35-10, and they lost to Davis 15-4. So Sulphur will be coming into this game 0-2. Whitesboro 1-2. I watched some highlights of Washington beating them in that 35-10 game, and they just don't look like a great Texas team. I mean, little unorganized. Kind of reminded me of Pilot Point, to be honest with you, as far as even their color scheme at times. Kind of reminded me of Pilot Point, a little more red, little a little more reddish in their colors. But I think that we're going to see Whitesboro bounce back in a big way against Sulphur. I think Clay is going to have a big game against that defense. I think Whitesboro will win a 42-14 kind of a game. I just don't think their offense is going to be good enough to take advantage of the mismatches and the deficiencies that Whitesboro is going to have. Ponder against Godley. We saw Godley play Paradise this past week, and they were not in that game. And we now see Ponder will play Godley, and Ponder is now, this will be their second opportunity to calibrate within the district, because Ponder played Crum after Whitesboro played Crum, and now Ponder will be playing Godley after Paradise played Godley. I think Godley will be a favorite over Ponder, but Ponder continues to uptick and continues to show defensively that they're a little bit better than we thought. Offensively, that quarterback that we keep talking about, Tyson Jones, is an incredible. Tyson Price, I should say. I don't know who Tyson Jones is. Tyson Price is a incredibly young, raw talent. But I think Godley will win this game by at least a score. But I think it'll be closer than the computer poll anyway. The computer poll has a 3-touchdown spread against Godley, where Godley is a 3-touchdown favorite. I think that they will be able to pretty much keep that game back and forth. And if they can get a couple of turnovers, you never know. Godley, yet to win a game, is reeling right now, so this is a great opportunity for Ponder to really establish themselves as a real strong contender for that fourth playoff spot. And maybe, as we talked about, I think the gap is lessening between Whitesboro at that third spot and the fourth. I think it's a lot smaller than it was even at the beginning of the year. So I still saying Whitesboro is definitely a strong number 3 contender. Just that gap, if Whitesboro goes into a game against Ponder or Boyd or whoever ends up being that fourth team and has 3 to 5 turnovers, certainly those teams are good enough to capitalize on that. But straight up clean football, I still think Whitesboro is the better team. Paradise against Millsap. I got to see Paradise last year against Millsap in this Plano East bye week, the District 4 3A weekend last year when I got to see Paradise and Millsap, and then Brock versus Gunter. This year, They are just back to playing a regular game, not at AT&T, and Paradise should be able to name its score against Millsap. I think Paradise will win a very efficient 49-8 kind of game against Millsap. And that leads us to our main event, Brock versus Gunter. And I keep going back and forth on this game, but the one thing that I consistently think about when I think about how Gunter played Prosper Walnut Grove was that anger, that light switch that turned on in the second quarter as Walnut Grove was driving to take the lead against Gunter, and all of a sudden Gunter kicked it into that next gear. Walker Overman just, took that team on his back, and defense stepped up, the offensive line play, whereas they were getting pushed around, they got challenged and they started doing the pushback. I haven't seen Brock quite do that yet. Brock is playing these good teams and playing competitive football against these good teams, but they haven't seemed to really get pissed off yet. They haven't seemed to get to that point where, and it could just be the demeanor of the coaches. It seems like Gunter is playing mad, and it seems like Brock is kind of playing good, but they're not playing mad. And if Brock doesn't play mad, I think Gunter, that's a intangible edge, especially at home, that Gunter is going to have. I'm waiting, I keep waiting for Brock to turn on this light switch and start playing mad and start, we keep talking about it each year with some of Billy Mathis's. He coaches mad. He's fired up and he is ready to go. But the team has not seemed to take that identity on in some of these tougher games. And Gunter did take that identity on against Walnut Grove. And whereas Brock, the one saving grace for Brock is that Brock has had these 3 games against really good 4A Division II teams that are going to make extended playoff runs, whereas Gunter, really, other than Walnut Grove, hasn't really played anybody. They played San Antonio Cornerstone, and they played Trinity Addison Christian, and they played Walnut Grove, but they haven't been playing this high level of competition. So now you put them together, and because Gunter is on the very top end of 3A Division Two. There's Paradise in 3A Division One. They have 369 students. Gunter has 354. So the line, in that three, I don't have it memorized, but obviously you can see only 15 students different between Gunter and Paradise. So Gunter is obviously at that top edge, and Paradise is looking at Brock with over 530 students and more. A lot of people think that Brock will definitely be moving up to 4A Division II in the next realignment. That Brock should have some sort of depth, but Gunter has a lot of players, a lot of depth, and they have an attitude. And right now, they have that offensive answer, that multiple offensive options that Brock didn't seem to have. Whereas last year, I think that last year was a very slugfest. It was a defensive game. I think we're going to see a lot of offense in this game. Can Brock keep up? And I think Brock will be able to keep up, but I don't think Brock will be able to surpass Gunter. I think Gunter is going to win a 49-35 or a 49-32 kind of, 49-42 kind of game. Uh, Brock has got to limit the turnovers. If Brock can finally turn over Gunter and change that narrative and have a couple of their players finally break out, Brock has all of the potential in the world to win this game. But when I look at, I'm a results oriented kind of a professor, I'm a results oriented kind of a prognosticator, and Brock just hasn't done it, and Gunter has consistently done that. So you put those two factors. Would it surprise me at all if Brock wins this game? No. Would I actually be cheering for Brock to win this game? Yeah, I actually kind of am cheering for Brock to win this game. I just don't think they have that killer instinct right now to do it. I think it'll evolve. I think they're going to get tough in district and get that confidence up. I think that's one thing that you saw last year in those close games with Whitesboro and Paradise. They got that confidence. They figured it out by the playoffs. They had the strong game against Malakoff that a lot of people didn't think they would win. Made it to the state championship. They showed that killer instinct in the state championship. They just weren't good enough and weren't able to crest that hill. It's just not there right now in week 4. I think Gunter is going to win this game in a very high scoring game by at least one score, if not 2 scores. So that is the District 4 3A report, and next week we are going to start District. And as part of that, we're going to start breaking down everything. Every week we're going to have 3 games. There will be a bye week that one team will have, and we're going to try to figure all of this out and understand who's going to be that 4th team. And now we're really at a level trying to figure out Paradise versus Brock. Because we just have no calibration. Paradise is playing way down and looking impressive. Brock is looking impressive playing up, even more so than last year, but just no calibration at all. So we've got to start to get some calibration, and when District starts, we will be able to do that. So again, like, subscribe, comment, do something. Probably the Pilot Point Coaches Association will not be liking and subscribing, but why don't you go apologize to Farmersville? That's what you can do. Old McDonald had a farm and he wanted to play a game, and because of that, who knows? So, for all of our friends at the Pilot Point Bearcat blog network, who is not associated with Pilot Point at ISD at all, are the people that made that decision. Thank you for tuning in to another District 4 3A report, and maybe Pilot Point will be giving me a message in our outro. We'll see you down the road.
Don't you care what people think? Doesn't it bother you that people are making you out to be a joke and that I'm gonna be included in that? Do you think that's right? Do you?
You ain't gonna believe this. But you used to fit right here. I'd hold you up and say to your mother, this kid's gonna be the best kid in the world. This kid's gonna be somebody better than anybody ever knew. And you grew up good and wonderful. It was great just watching you every day. It was like a privilege. Then the time come for you to be your own man and take on the world, and you did. But somewhere along the line, you changed. You stopped being you. You let people stick a finger in your face and tell you you're no good. And when things got hard, you started looking for something to blame, like a big shadow. Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Now, if you know what you're worth, now go out and get what you're worth. But you gotta be willing to take the hits and not pointing fingers saying you ain't where you wanna be because of him or her or anybody. Cowards do that, and that ain't you. You're better than that.